You're listening to Buy My Merch, a Heads on TV podcast. My name is Marilyn. I'm a musician, and I've been working in digital marketing in the entertainment industry for a decade. I started this podcast as a way to ask artists what it really takes in the modern music industry to make it on your own. Asking questions like, how did you get through it when no one would show up to your shows? Or how did you survive financially when you were selling merch out of the trunk of your car? Welcome to the music industry conversation you've been looking for. Welcome back, everyone, to a brand new episode of the Buy My Merch podcast. Today, I'm sitting down with somebody who I was so excited to find out was already a fan of my Heads on TV content. When I saw she followed me back on TikTok, I was like, I need you to come on my podcast. I think you have such an incredibly unique career story, and I want you to tell it. And that artist is none other than Laura Escudé. Laura is a multi-instrumentalist, producer, and artist who also just happens to be one of Ableton's very first certified trainers. These days, she's known for traveling the world with her extremely unique and very cinematic live performance style. She often brings out an extensive live looping setup. She has violins. It's crazy cool. You guys have to check out some of her performance videos. She's also known to many in this industry as the queen of the nerds, as her love of gear is something that really opened up a lot for her career-wise, including an opening DJ slot for a tour with Miguel, as well as several years touring with Kanye West as his music designer. We also had a really great conversation that might have been my favorite part of this interview, where Laura gets very candid about mental health and the things that don't really get exposed about what life on the road is really like. As a woman in the music industry who also has a fascination with a lot of the behind the scenes stuff, Laura is a major inspiration to myself and others just like me. I really hope this interview inspires you to get involved with any and every facet of the music industry that's interesting to you. Lord knows we need more women in just about every part of it. And now here's my conversation with Laura Escudé. Laura, I feel like we have to start at the top to just talk a little bit about how we know each other. So when Laura just walked in, I was like, oh, my past life, I worked at Guitar Center and I worked with artists and you must know me from that. She goes, oh no, I just love your videos. It's like,
I'm a big fan. Are you kidding me? When you reached out for me to do this, I was like, wait, yes, absolutely.
Stop it.
Yeah,
Stop it
such
right
a big
now.
fan.
I first want to know right off the bat, how did you first develop a stage persona as like an electronic artist?
Well, I was a classical violinist first, and I played classical music all throughout my childhood and then college. And my junior year of college, my best friend's boyfriend was a DJ, and they were going to these raves. And I was like, well, I have no idea what this is. I've never heard this music. And so they kept saying, come with us. And I was like, I don't know if it's my thing. Finally, I went and I was like, this is so amazing. Are you kidding me? Like, people, like, what is this music? I'd never heard anything like it before. And at that time, I was really into drum and bass music, which is like really hard because it's so fast. And I was like, what would happen if I played violin over drum and bass music? So I started performing with this DJ, and it was awful at the time. It was just straight up awful, as we all are when we first start, we're just getting our sea legs. But I started growing from there, and actually my other friend started dating George Clinton's son's producer. So I was booking shows at this club in Tallahassee at Florida State, where I went to school, and we booked this funk band called Smoke, and they came in, and it was like, wait a minute, okay, you're George Clinton's son, okay, cool. And then they're like, do you guys want to go to the studio? Looking over their shoulders, like, what's going on? Trying to figure out what they were doing. And then I kept just being really annoying and saying like, but you should try this, or you should do this, or, and then they're like, well, why don't you just come in and do it? And I was like, well, I don't know how. And they're like, well, let me show you. So that was like my first intro to producing and also performing electronic music. And then I just became a big rave kid, and I was just going to so many raves, and I was like, this is my culture. I've found my thing. Just got super into it, and then just started growing and building from there.
At the beginning, coming from a violin that you now plug into this crazy cool setup, did you have any help figuring that out?
Initially, no, I didn't. I was literally plugging in my violin into the back of a PC desktop computer. And this is in 2000, so this is a while ago. I was plugging it into a desktop and this crappy sound card, and I don't know. It just sounded awful. It sounded terrible. I didn't know anything. And I did meet someone a few years later who was like, here, let me show you some things. And I'm super grateful for him. But in the very beginning, it was just a lot of trial and error and like, should I do this? Should I do this? And then I bought like a synthesizer for way too much money. And I was like, this is what I need. I was a mess at that point. I had no idea what I was doing.
Did you ever find yourself like literally learning how to navigate this gear in a live show setting for the first time?
Yeah. Oh yeah. Well, I mean, and that later became my career kind of. At the time though, it was a lot of just trying to make it work. It was awkward. You know, I definitely had a lot of awkward shows where I was like, this doesn't sound good, you know, and I knew that it didn't. And also I couldn't afford to buy high-end gear at that time. You know, I was like, just gotten out of college. I didn't have any money. So I was like, okay, I'm going to just spend, you know, $50 on, you know, a sound card or whatever. And that was like my first introduction to like M audio, which is part of my story as well when I moved to Los Angeles. But I was just using these products that were like the most inexpensive things that you could buy and just praying every show. Like, I hope this works. Ah.
You talk about how that ended up leading into sort of like your lighting design, show design career. Was there a pivotal moment of that, or was it a natural skill set?
I'm a music designer.
Okay.
So, and a live show programmer and a playback engineer. So it gets a little confusing because there are all of these different roles, and we're like, we're designing something. And I think, you know, design is, people love to use that word because it sounds, you know, fancy.
It does.
You're like,
it does.
We design. I'm just a designer. But I mean, there's the whole, I don't know how much of the story you want me to tell. I can tell like the brief, as
much as you want,
you know, the brief hit points. But I was in Florida. I'd graduated from college. I got a job teaching Pro Tools at the school there. Decided to move to LA with my best friend and my boyfriend. And I was in a band with my best friend. The boyfriend and I broke up. It was just a whole bad scenario. And I suddenly found myself, I was like, well, I don't know anyone here. I'm going to, you know, just get really into this stuff. I had a lot of M audio gear, and M audio, I don't know if people are familiar, but it was like the very first like portable sound card, the Oxygen 8, that little tiny controller. So I had a controller that wasn't working. I was on a PC at the time. I was going back and forth with this guy in tech support, and it wasn't working, and it was working on a Mac, and he was kind of like, just get a Mac. And I was like, well, I can't afford a Mac. I want to get a Mac, but I can't afford a Mac. And so then I went to this like underground electronic music night, and I was hanging out with some people, and there was this guy, and he's like, wait a minute, you're the girl that knows all this stuff about technology. And I was like, wait a minute, you're the guy from tech support. And he was like, do you want a job? You know? And I was like, actually, yeah, I really need a job. So that's how I got my first job in LA. I was also doing like super odd jobs, going to shows and being in the audience, like talk shows and being in the audience, and they would pay $10 an hour to just sit there. I was doing tons of odd jobs, just like whatever I could to get by out here, because LA is a lot more expensive than Florida, you know? So I started working at M Audio, and M Audio was distributing this software, little known software at the time called Ableton Live. And I'd never heard of this software. I was using Pro Tools and Reason at the time. And we were getting all these calls, you know, how do I use this Ableton software? What is this, you know? And we're like, I was like, well, I guess I need to learn how to use this software. And once I did, I was like, this is amazing. Whoa. It was so slept on at the time, because this was 2005. People were like, oh my gosh, like, Ableton Live, that Pro Tools is the industry standard. Like, we're not going to mess around with that because it's like this dinky piece of software. And I was like, no, it's really amazing. So anyway, I became somewhat of an evangelist for Ableton and did different jobs. I was doing like VIP artist tech support at M Audio. So started working with these big artists and going over to their studios and helping them set up their stuff. And then Ableton hired me to be their first West Coast product specialist.
Wow.
And this was in 2007.
Very first?
Very first.
Very first.
Right. So I was like one of the first people they'd hired remotely, because they had a an office in Berlin, and then they had a small office in New York. And then I was living out here and it was remote. So I was actually going around to all the guitar centers and Sam Ashes and being like, Ableton's so amazing. This is all the things you can do with it, and trying to teach the salespeople how to use the software. So that was my job, was just going everywhere and talking about how amazing Ableton was. Kind of a parallel in our stories was I got laid off when the economy tanked, and I was devastated. This was in 2008. Yeah. I was like, what am I going to do? Like, you know, and I was also releasing albums and doing my music, but that wasn't really paying enough for me to like live my life. So I started my first company then, and I just started growing from there. And it ended up being like the biggest blessing in the world, because I got a call from Cirque du Soleil, and they were like, do you want to move to Vegas and work on this Cirque du Soleil show for 4 months? And we're going to pay you a lot of money. I was like, at that time I was just
Vegas
like,
money.
I was like,
money.
What? You're going to, yes, I'm there. You know, I was so scared, but it was incredible.
Did you also share any doubts or concerns that it wasn't ever going to live up to something like Pro Tools?
I mean, I don't think I cared at that point. I was just like, this is more me. Pro Tools is amazing. Like, don't get me wrong. I don't use it anymore. I mean, I know how to use it, but if I'm going to go and record in a studio, like, and people are using Pro Tools and we're recording a band or something like that, and we're mixing and mastering, all that kind of stuff, that's amazing. But if you're going to do like quirky little weird nerdy stuff that sounds weird, like, you're going to use Ableton. And also, if you're going to do a live show, you're going to use Ableton Live, like, hands down. It's called Ableton Live. It was built for a live performance. So
eventually that ended up leading you into music programming for some pretty crazy opportunities like Kanye West and Jay-Z. How do you end up in a circle that could get you an opportunity like that?
I mean, it's about being in the right place at the right time and being a cool person that people want to be around, and being good at your craft and being good at what you do. But at the Ableton job, I was going around to the guitar centers and all of these stores, right? And West LA Music was a store back then. It was like Guitar Center, right? So I'd go into West LA Music, and this sales guy there was like, hey, do you want to get connected with Kanye's engineer? I like knew who Kanye was. This is 2008. I was like, yeah, of course. I mean, I didn't really know him, but I'd known like his earlier albums and like a few songs, and I was like, yeah, like I know who that is. Like, cool. I mean, right now to say I know who that is is so hilarious. But at the time, it was like, yeah, I think I know who that is. Okay,
it's
cool.
2008 era Kanye.
Right. He was still huge then, but you know, very different. So so I went into the studio to work with his engineer, and his engineer was on the road doing playback. This playback wasn't like really a thing back then. It was like very different. A lot of people didn't treat that as like its own role, and they would have their studio engineers like come on tour. And some studio engineers can go and do the touring thing, but it's a very different skill set. And it also, like, there's a lot of stress. It's live. There's a lot of, you know, complications and things that happen. So anyway, this guy, he was kind of like, well, do you want to go do this eventually? And he was starting a family, and it ended up, I couldn't do it then because I was doing the Cirque du Soleil thing. But then 2 years later, it kind of all came back around, and I ended up touring with him from 2011 through 2018, almost every show. So I started my Beautiful Dark Twisted Fantasy era, which was amazing. I mean, at that point, I was like, this music just is incredible. It speaks to my soul. Like, wow, I didn't know that hip hop music could be this emotive and beautiful and just textural and layered, and just the production was so amazing, and everything about it, I was just like obsessed at that point. And it was like the Runaway video, and like, it's so good.
What are the types of things you need to consider when you're putting together a set list that does have some very recognizable songs in it, and you're putting together this design for it? So
with each artist that I've worked with, it's different. Some artists have a musical director, and I work with the musical director very closely, and they, like a lot of the bigger artists, have a musical director, and we work closely, and the musical director will have the vision, and they'll say, okay, I think that this is what the set list should be like. Oftentimes for those shows, I would be with Kanye and Jay-Z, I'd be like waiting kind of backstage to find out the set list, like right before the show, with the laptop kind of perched on my knee and like ready to, rearrange stuff. And then with other artists, it is more of a design, like with artists, like Porter Robinson. I toured with Miguel. I was his DJ and also did playback for him. It was more creative. It was like, okay, like let's translate what you did on your album together and then create this set. I was a musical director for Becky G, so it's artists like that. Was a younger artist at that time, so I was helping to more design the music and put the set list together in that way. So it really is different with every artist, and it depends on what they need, who else is on their team, like what your expertise is, because some people that do put programming and playback aren't necessarily musicians, so they don't have that skill set. Like for instance, I'm working on American Idol now, and I need to be able to read sheet music for that. So like every gig is completely different. But going back to that time, it very much was like I was just thrown into the lion's den, and I was like, here you go, sink or swim. And I was like, we often didn't know the set list, and we would try to craft the set list, me and the musical director and the band members, and then it would get thrown out. So it was always just like random and
different every time.
Yeah.
Let's say there's someone right now who's interested in that world. What advice might you give them for getting started?
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Well, first of all, I think there's a lot of artists that think that they want to do this, and it's great. I mean, there are, like, I'm an artist, and then I also am a playback engineer and programmer, and that's cool. You have to kind of take a back seat to the actual artist. And some people aren't good at that, so you really have to know your place and stay in your lane. I mean, for a while, like, I would offer creative suggestions only after I had felt comfortable enough to do that.
Yeah.
But then some people will just roll in and be like, I think you should do this. And it's like, who are you? Sit back, If it is something that you're passionate about, like a lot of people are like, I love working in Ableton. Like, I love, making beats. It's not that. Sometimes it can be that. Like, It's like, let's remix our song right now. Let's go. Let's just, let's do a house remix, or let's do like a rock remix, because artists get tired of listening to their own songs and they want to just revamp them. But a lot of times it's just like, let's take out this chorus and let's double this part, and like, let's add this intro, because we want to walk on. And then, or it's like, oh my gosh, Drake is here. We need to like take, add Drake's verse part in here so that he can do it. And we can't have his lead vocal in the house, so we need to have that in his in-ear so he can remember what he sang or what he said. Because a lot of times artists, we forget, like, especially with all these catalogs. So it's, it's a lot of just like kind of crafting it to the moment and whatever might happen and whatever needs to happen.
Being on your toes is going to end up being a really big piece of it.
Being on your toes, yeah. And also just like really being centered. I think that's a lot of things. A lot of people think they can do this job, and then they get in there and it's like, it's extremely stressful. Like you're doing a show for, well, the biggest that I think I did was Glastonbury, which is like several 100,000 people in the audience.
Huge.
It's nerve-wracking. Like, and you have to be perfect. If you aren't, you're out. You make a mistake, you're out. So, I mean, barring technology, I have to like remind myself, like, okay, I've done all I can do, and we have redundant setups. If one computer goes down, the other one takes over. But there's stuff that's always going to be left up to chance. Being able to be in the room with these big artists while they're like making their decisions, and then they're like, hey, I need you to change all of these different things, and being able to say yes or no, not always being a yes person, and knowing to say, like, you know what, this could actually really screw up the show. Like, you're asking me to do this 5 minutes before the show, the house lights are coming down. I mean, I've been editing on the backup computer while the show has been running, and then I will finish editing in time for the next song to play. And then when it comes to play that edited song, I will switch over to that song and then switch back to the A computer. And like, it's extremely stressful. So if you can't handle that kind of stress, like, it's not the job for you.
I see these projects. I'm sure they're crazy.
So crazy. So many versions. There's just like a million different versions of the same show, kind of.
Wow.
Yeah.
You talk a little bit about stress. I know you've been vocal about burnout and actually experiencing that. It's so rarely talked about. I think it should be so much more platformed. I wanted to ask, you actually bring up there was a specific time that you really felt it. You took a big pause. What were you doing to reset yourself?
Yeah. So this is 2016. I had just gotten off doing a world tour with Miguel. I was DJing for him and doing playback. It was amazing. It was awesome. I had a week where I did a show with Iggy Azalea, Kanye's Pablo album release in New York. And then I flew back to LA and did a show with Miguel at the Forum. And so these are like big shows.
Huge.
I did, the first show, and I traveled, and then I did a show, and it was too much. I went out that night, and I just as I used to do very often, partied quite heavily, because to relieve the stress of doing these shows, we would be holding on so tight. Oh my gosh. Okay, we're done. Let's go, So,
wow.
Which, is totally cool. I like to have fun, but at the same time, I'm, a little more conscious about my partying and what I do.
Of course. Yeah.
Have to take care of yourself. So I don't know what happened that night, but the next day I woke up and my stomach was in severe pain. Wow. And I ended up in the hospital for 21 days. And it was the scariest time, because I was literally I didn't know if I lost so much weight, and I was just laying, I couldn't eat anything. And it was awful. And they still don't really know what it was. They're it was E. coli or salmonella, or something really affected my stomach. But what I got out of it was, you need to change your life. You need to change your lifestyle. You cannot continue coping with stress in these ways anymore. And so I took it as a major sign from the universe, hey, slow your roll, girl. You can't be touring and doing all this crazy stuff. And so I did take a step back. I mean, I will still I always say if Bjork or some, artist that I really resonate with now wants me to go on tour with her and be in the band and play violin and do Ableton stuff, I'd be super stoked. But for now, I'm just in this place in my life where I don't need to go kill myself on a tour. And it is kind of a young person's game. I'm in my 40s now, and which is still young, of course.
Of course.
But at the same time, you kind of reach this point where you're okay, I've toured the world so many times over. It's rad. I love touring. I love traveling, but I also am a tourist, and I love being at my home and just chilling.
I recently actually turned 30. And
baby.
I know. And it's funny because I think for me, I'm entering this understanding of how exactly do I want to spend my energy? My energy has a budget. And I really appreciate you sharing that piece of it, because I think a lot of people will hear your story and think, oh, these incredible things that she did. But that was also a part of what it means to do all of those incredible things.
Yeah. Well, and also as an artist myself, and I think a lot of artists will resonate with this, it seems amazing to be touring the world, working with these incredible artists. And you learn a lot. I mean, I learned so much from touring with these artists, so much about how to behave and how I want my show to be, and just all of the ins and outs of running a live show from top to bottom, and all the different roles that people play. And just, I learned so much. But at the end of the day, there's an artist inside me too. And am I going to continue feeding this artist's career and their self-expression, or do I want to feed my own career and my own self-expression? So that's really what that moment taught me. It was okay, I cannot die without putting my own music out and continuing to create, whether it's videos or audio or music.
Absolutely.
Experiences. So that's what that really taught me. And yes, no, I know I'm never going to be as big as Kanye or some of these artists that I've worked with. And that's okay. It's fine, because I found a way to have these little niche things all come together. And I still, I told you, I'm working on American Idol right now.
Yeah.
So that's 6 weeks. And so that's a great gig. It's in town. It really works for me. I love it. And I have my company that does playback. So I have trained a lot of different people to go out on tours and do the same work that I've been doing. And then the rest of the time I get to mentor artists and create my own music and perform and do fun stuff. So I think it's much more like I have much more freedom now than I did, because when I was touring, the artist would be like, all right, we're going to go do this. And I'd be like, okay, let's go. And sometimes it would literally be like next day, like Kanye would be like, we're going to Ibiza tomorrow. I'd be like, okay, like,
pack my bags.
Exactly. I mean, one time I was like not even unpacked in the same day. It was like, oh, you need to fly back to London. I was like, oh my gosh. So, you know, that kind of lifestyle, it was super fun at the time, but now I'm just not about that.
Little birdie told me you got to hang with Rick Rubin a little bit.
Oh yeah.
And I watched a video where you shared this awesome story time, two-parter. What was it like at a studio, and how do we get you back in the studio with Rick Rubin? Tell us everything.
Yes, Rick, let's go. So I actually met him through Kanye. Kanye was, Rick had executive produced the Yeezus album.
Yeah.
And so we were in rehearsals and Rick was there, and you know, we started chatting and we started talking about live looping on stage. He's into Ableton. Like he was like, oh, like, you know, all this stuff about live looping. And we just started nerding out, and he's like, yeah, do you want to come to the studio? And, you know, so invited me to the studio. And it was like, I mean, there's been like tons of, you know, interviews and documentaries that have been done, but it's exactly like, I mean, it's like so many different people hanging out, being creative in different zones all over the place. It was like 10 different projects going on at one time. Rick Rubin is like, you know, who I aspire to be like, not in the same way, because, you know, you see all the pictures and videos of him just like on the couch. Just
and
like,
he's so philosophical, right? Like I was looking, I got to read like a biography on him, but he talks about how he doesn't know how some of the stuff works.
Yeah.
He vibes with it and has his engineers do it on his behalf.
Yeah.
Wild.
It's so great. Yeah.
Wild.
Well, and he's like he has the confidence, but he leans back, you know? And I think for so many years, I was like leaning forward, you know? I was so hungry, which we as young people often are.
Yep.
Choose me, pick me. Oh, I'm special. You know? And then you see people like Rick, and people are coming to him because it's that energy, you know? But that's the great thing about social media, I think. Like when I was first getting started with all this stuff, there wasn't social media. There wasn't any way for people to find out about me except for word of mouth. And now you are an excellent case of this. Like you make these amazing videos and people gravitate towards you and want to come learn from you and know you. And so I love that. I just love how it really brings everyone to like an even playing field. And it's like you can reach out and be in touch with your heroes. Like they're right there. And then also making videos, you know, making content on the things that I love, doing partnerships with brands in that way, or just like making a video about something that I love that they haven't paid me. Like I bought it outright, you know, like I just love to share my knowledge or share something that really speaks to me in any way. Start practicing like the craft, the art of making like cool videos and content.
Yep.
I mean, and then just get better at it. I'm always thinking like, how can I get better at this? You know, and then through my videos, I'll have brands reach out and say like, hey, would you like to work together? But at this point, you know, I don't do any reach outs just because I'd rather just like have my work speak for itself and just have people be excited to work with me for who I am. Like you already knew of me, but you were like, let's do this interview. Let's do this podcast.
I need be good conversation. Yeah. I know you have an incredible perspective. And you're also, I just have to say it at some point in this interview, like when I was first getting started in music, everything about buying gear, understanding how it worked was so intimidating. And as a woman, I felt I needed to find a guy in LA or a guy who understood this to show me.
Yeah.
And just knowing you exist in the way that you do and you've done what you've done. I just think for those watching and listening, for sure, Laura's a great example of let your work speak for itself and find the thing that's making you so passionate that you can't stop doing it. You can't explain why you need to keep doing it. A lot of artists roll their eyes at me, but like you would be surprised how fast these brands come to you. And, you know, with this with real opportunity, not just like nice video, we're going to like it. I'm talking brand deals and like really exciting things. And you must have experienced that too.
Yeah, absolutely. And also not being afraid to say no. Because I think especially when you're younger, it's like, oh, someone's going to pay me to do something, or someone's, but if it's not fully aligned with who you are as an artist, I'm definitely at that point now where I just turned down something that I cannot believe that I turned down because, it was for a TV show to make some music, but it wasn't going to be my music. And I thought about it and I tried. And then I was like, this is not fun for me because I want to do it in my style. I've heard so many stories about artists like turning something major down. And then the big thing that they really want is on the other side. So you have to be willing to just be like uncomfortable for a minute or however long it takes. Sometimes you might struggle. You might not have the money. You might have to do like things that you don't want to do for a short time. But really like picking and choosing what those are, because our time is so valuable, especially as we get older. We're like, okay, it's very finite, so I don't have all the time in the world, so how do I want to spend my time? And I think the 10,000 hours thing is so real too, because if you're working on your craft and you want to be really good at something, you need to do it repetitively. And so the more that you can focus on that and you find the thing that you want to focus on, that's also hard. Like I'm multi-passionate, I like to do a lot of different things. It's all like related to music, but I like to do a lot of different things. But some people are like musicians and then they're artists and, and I'm like, wow, it's so incredible. Like, how do you do all these things? And they're really good at multiple things. Like they're actors and they're in a band. It's possible because there's like all of these examples out there. It's entirely possible.
I want to ask you about live looping. And the reason is I will make sure for the video part you guys can see a photo of Laura's setup, but like, is it as intimidating as it looks, the world of live looping? It does look intimidating. Maybe I'm asking someone who just, it's so natural to you, but
no,
it looks intimidating to me.
I think first of all, I think it's so awesome that you're asking me about live looping because I've been doing it for so long. And in the past couple of years, it's gotten to be like a thing, right? And it's like there's all these amazing artists on the internet that are doing incredible things. It's just awesome to see. I think there's like simple ways to do it that make it less intimidating. There's the Boss RC 505 that a lot of people use, and it's it's pretty simple to use and it's fun and you don't need a computer. I personally use Ableton obviously to loop. Once you get it set up, like it just depends on how far you want to go with it, like how complicated you want to make it. And this is actually why I started doing a lot of content for artists and courses for artists on the topic of live looping and, the topic of designing your own live show and putting together your own live show. Yeah. Because like you said, a lot of people gatekeep this information, or you'll go on YouTube and you're like, okay, like this person's doing it this way, but it's so confusing. And how do I set it from scratch? So I literally have been like, okay, this is how you do it from scratch. So if you want to learn about this stuff, I have free videos on my YouTube.
Absolutely take advantage of that if you're into this world.
As well as courses. Yeah. Absolutely.
Yeah. I think it's also too, like there's something about the volume of gear. So when I worked at Guitar Center, I learned so much about gear, but I at first felt that the more gear I saw in front of me, the more it was going to be harder to figure it out. But it really just seems to me it's mastering and understanding what each of those things do to your sound. Is that how you've learned it?
And starting small, like learning one thing really well, like super well, and just learning it backwards and forwards until you feel absolutely comfortable with that. And then you might be like, how can I add 2 loops, or 3 or whatever. It's just a process, I think. And like with anything, you just start from the beginning of learning how to use like the one thing and then multiply out.
Do you run into weird technical issues with it being a violin that you're actually plugging into all of this stuff? Or did you at first?
I think at first, because I didn't fully know how to do all the things. Like, as I mentioned, I was like plugging my violin into a PC desktop computer. But I think now the technology is just so user-friendly and so much easier. I mean, it's great. And again, you can go to YouTube if you don't have any money to spend on a course. Like you can go to YouTube and find all of these different videos and resources from people.
If you had to pick one piece of gear to get started with, like I want to start live looping with my guitar tomorrow, what's the first thing you'd say, go grab it?
I would say Ableton Live software. You need that to loop. And then I would say a foot controller if you're a guitarist or a violinist or playing anything with both of your hands. So I actually have a wireless foot controller called the POC, and it's a super niche thing, but it's Bluetooth compatible, so you can put it anywhere on stage, and it's really great. And I use that to loop all of my stuff in Ableton with. When I first started out, there weren't any other women doing what I do, and I did learn from men, and I'm really grateful for that. But now just to be able to see that other women are looking up to me and they're excited to produce their own music, that's everything to me. That's why I do what I do. So yeah, I just continue to make my videos in the hopes that it will inspire people or make them feel something, if my music resonates with them on a soul level or a spiritual level, and it makes them, want to go home and be introspective or reflective or make love or whatever it is. There's just all kinds of ways that we can affect people and help people through our artistry and through our content. And that's absolutely, I'm not making it for that purpose necessarily. I'm not sitting there thinking, I want people to feel this way, but it's a byproduct of it all, just to help everyone raise their vibration and raise their moods and how they're feeling, and to just feel like they can do it. The conditioning that we've all had since we were really young, and you need to be like this and it must be this way. Let's get rid of all that. Let's just actually be who we are. And I think more and more as I've been becoming more of who I am, I think it's the hearing that people around me are also feeling that way because of who I am. That's everything to me.
If social media went away tomorrow, how would you then start either performing or marketing your music? What would be your method?
Probably get a beautiful space, invite people, have relationships with people in your town, people that own a space, go down there and say hey, I would like to do this thing. Would you allow me to do it for free, or we can split the door or whatever, just to get started like that. I want to do that still. That would probably be my main thing, is just go to the places that you want to be at and just talk to the people.
Are there any memories you have really early on in any of your pursuits that you had a silly embarrassment that felt so heavy at the time, but then you sort of realized it was very minuscule, probably fine?
Probably the first time I played violin with a DJ, it didn't sound good at all. And it was I just remember being really embarrassed. And I didn't know what to play either, because I had come from a classical background, and I was literally stepping into improvisation, It's a whole other skill set. And I just felt really embarrassed that I didn't know how to play over this music. Yeah. And I thought everyone was judging me. Looking back, I'm oh, it's okay. We have to reparent ourselves, and be it's okay, little girl. It's okay.
And then you had all these incredible opportunities happen. That's the lesson, is no matter what feels like it weighs on you at that time, you will still get through the crazy, weird technical mishap of that one time. How do you prioritize budgeting around these different things?
A really good thing. Well, I am not the best person at budgeting. When I get money, I do try to put some of it aside, but then I also have invested quite heavily in my own artistry and my pursuits, because that's what lights me up and makes me feel happy. Generally, it always seems to work out somehow. And I've spent lots of money on music videos. I don't recommend doing that unless you're, have a lot of resources. But earlier on, I was I'm just going to spend $30,000 on this music video. And it's a great music video, but also it went beyond what I thought it was going to be. And it was a work of art, but also was wow, okay, this gets really expensive. I've done dumb, reckless stuff, where I shouldn't have done it. And then it's always worked out. I think being such a gear nerd and just being into technology for a really long time, I used to approach music through the lens of what gear am I going to use and what is it going to sound like? And the sound part, yes, but I definitely have shifted a lot, especially in the last couple of years. Since the pandemic, I just was going on this like inner journey, as we all kind of did. Like, who am I? Why am I here? All these existential questions. Like, what am I trying to convey? What is my experience? What do I ultimately want my experience to be like? What are the things that I'm doing to soothe myself or to feel better or to help other people? Feeling more into my emotions than I did before. And I think being a woman in a really masculine world, especially the touring world, I was like very much like, okay, I need to put on this tough exterior. And I did that for so long. I really didn't know like how else to be. And so now I think in the past couple of years, especially, I've softened a lot more, and I'm like, I want to just be a creative. What is that like? You know, I'm going to create music from the heart, music that's truly speaking through me, instead of being so nerdy about it. And I know it's like funny to hear, because everyone's like, you're the queen of the nerds though. Like, you love all this stuff. I'm like, I do, but there's a lot of new stuff out now that I don't even know about, because it's not my focus anymore. You know, like, of course, if someone brings over a cool thing and I'm going to play with it and I'm going to have fun with it, but I'm not like, I need every single piece of new gear, because it gets overwhelming, you know, and then you're just like jamming, which is amazing. I love jamming, but you're not actually finishing music because you're just playing around with these different toys and these different tools. And there's a place for that, absolutely. But when you're trying to release music, it can be really inhibiting to have so many different options. So I've actually been trying to scale back and like just deal with a couple of different things. I have templates in Ableton where it's like, okay, I'm going to start from this and just use what's in here right now and just limit myself to that and see what comes out of it. I've been working on new music. Genre-wise, I don't know. It's kind of like this mid-tempo, like ambient house, I would say. Very dreamy. You want to move your body to it. It's got, of course, lots of violins and synthesizers and things like that. Been taking vocal lessons.
That's
and like,
so cool.
You know, singing for the first time. So it's really like, really been a shift for me, and I'm really excited to share it with the world when it's ready, which should hopefully
I hope soon. I'm one of the first. I can't wait to hear it. Hey everybody, Marilyn here. Thanks for listening to this episode of the Buy My Merch podcast. Did you know that you can book a one-on-one session with me to help plan your next big music industry move? Heads on TV's Sessions program positions me as your in-between manager. You know, because you're not quite ready for a full-time manager yet, but you are looking for someone you can regularly bounce ideas off of. Together, we'll work on things like release strategies, TikTok ideas, and, of course, building out your artist universe. And our first session together is always free. You can learn more about these sessions, including pricing and even my credentials in the music industry, at headson.tv/sessions. That's headson.tv/sessions.